Amen. I am particularly excited today to welcome Anna Husarska, who is a Polish journalist and policy analyst and humanitarian. I had the pleasure of meeting her in Warsaw this past fall and listening to her just share a few stories of the work she's doing now and her work covering humanitarian crises and conflict over the course of a long career. I knew that she would be a wonderful person to kind of broach the subject of humanitarian journalism and what does it mean to look at conflict and share with students how she got into this, what she's done, and what she's doing now. And so I'm going to welcome her, and invite her to share with us. And then we have three wonderful St. John students who are themselves engaged and interested in journalism, who will ask her questions and engage her in dialogue when she is finished. So Anna, I turn it over to you.
Thank you very much. Thank you for inviting me. And it was a Catholic journalist who put us in touch, so it's very apropos. I am a journalist. I'm still writing. I am Polish. I'm also French. I used to be a resident in the United States. I turned back my green card in January 2017, and I'm now only French and Polish. I have started, since I'm speaking to students, I wanted to say that I studied economics, electronics, Latin American literature, and the translator school, never journalism. But as they say in French, one is born a journalist, and if it goes well. For me, it went well, but it went mostly through the languages, in fact, because the fact of speaking several foreign languages gave me a possibility of going into several countries and reporting from them. I now speak fluently 7 languages, and I can sort of make myself understood in 3 more, but they are in hibernation, so to speak. It all started when I was in France. I was studying Latin American literature, and a friend wanted someone to teach her Spanish so that she could go to El Salvador to a humanitarian mission of the French doctors. And we went to the market, and I showed her which fruit is called what. And then 2 months later, she said, "Could you come to Salvador to solve a few questions?" And I came. And as I was there, I saw what was happening, and I described it first in my report to the French doctors, and then I sent it to the Spectator, and they published it. It was about mosquito Indians that were living in the abandoned cathedral of Managua. And it was a long, long time ago. I prefer not to think how long ago. I learned good English, and I learned good translation by translating George Orwell, Abraham Lincoln, and believe it or not, Dostoevsky, because Dostoevsky was a strange case. It was a Polish friend of mine who wrote a script based on the demons, and I translated the script. So with the help of the translated version of Demons, I translated Dostoevsky from Polish into English, sort of. But Orwell was a great lesson in good writing, good and concise writing. I started publishing a lot in a niche newspaper called the Buenos Aires Herald, which was an English language paper in Buenos Aires. And they wanted everything I wanted to send to them. The events in Poland, Solidarity, etc. was happening, so they were welcoming everything. When I worked in the Polish press office of Solidarity in Paris, we used to print underground press in French. So I was translating from Polish into French, and then we were publishing it, and this was my way of being a bridge between Poland that was far away and France where I was. And again, it was a very good experience of being a bridge and of matching the audience who wanted to learn, and we had the materials. Later on, when I went to do the same work in New York, I started working again in a niche. It was a bi-weekly that was created by the Mensheviks, which is a Russian sub of the Bolsheviks. There was Bolsheviks and Mensheviks, and the Menshevik bi-weekly was called The New Leader. It was absolutely perfectly edited, and hardly anybody knew about it or read it. But the editor would come and say, "Did you remember the comma on the third page? There was a comma that I put." It was a slave driver who taught me, we couldn't use two howevers in one article. If you use twice however, he would cross it out and say, "Nevertheless," was my way of getting away. Anyway, this was The New Leader, and I started writing very, very small, in short, for the New York Times book review, little reviews of Polish and Russian and Latin American books, but it was really minor. But I got the editors of the book review interested in the underground press, and I managed to have a big essay on the first page on the bottom, and it went for 2 more pages inside. I took advantage of this and immediately went to the New Republic and told them, "This is my 15 minutes of glory. Can you please employ me?" And they didn't employ me, but they gave me an 800 number, and they promised they will read what I send. And I went back to Poland, and this was the time when the Eastern Europe was in total upheaval. So I went to Romania and reported on this for the New Republic, and then the whole of the Eastern Bloc was changing, and I was reporting on this. And then the disintegration of Yugoslavia started, and I happened to quickly learn the language, and I managed to trade my linguistic skills for a place in a armored car with the journalist who had armored cars and didn't know what the guy at the checkpoint was saying, and they weren't friendly at the checkpoint. So and the problem in Bosnia was that you couldn't take a Bosnian translator to the Croat land, or a Serb translator into Croat, or Croat translator to Serbia. So you needed someone who understood this one language, excuse me, who understood this one language but couldn't, but could move from one place to another. And this is what I was doing. This was Yugoslavia, and I reported for the New Republic from there. I then stayed for a long time in Mostar, which was a Croat stronghold in the Croat part of Bosnia. Then I moved to the Serb part, to Banja Luka, and lived there for a while. And then I moved to Sarajevo, because my view was that if I stay in those places, I will make friends, I will understand them daily, I will not be demonizing them. They are also people, they also love their kids, and they have their dogs, and they walk their dogs just like. But everybody who was in Sarajevo thought that only people in Sarajevo are nice, everybody else is not nice. Staying in those other places gave me a different set of experiences, so to speak. So, but I did stay most of the time in Sarajevo, and I wasn't getting very much printed about Sarajevo because there was a limit of how much the New Republic wanted from Sarajevo. So I thought I'll start writing opinion pieces. And soon enough, I was writing opinion pieces, and I joined something that was created then in the United States called the International Crisis Group. It was the idea of the late Mort Abramovich, who used to be Undersecretary of State for Intelligence and later worked at Brookings Institution and was a very excellent mentor for me. And I joined the International Crisis Group. We were a very small group. There were 5 or 6 of us. One of them was Samantha Power, later to be the ambassador in the UN and the director of the USAID. But at the time, we were just looking at how the Dayton agreements are being implemented, and we were putting out the reports, and it had some influence on what the people there were doing. We had people from the embassies coming to our door when we were putting out the reports. It doesn't happen very often. But the advocacy that I was told to present was mostly that bad people should be good and shooting should stop, and we don't want crimes to be committed. And I thought it's Mort used to call it wishy-washy, those advocacy points. So we sort of abandoned this and tried to think out of the box. And being a maverick by nature, I was quite at ease being out of the box. I never lived in the box, but I didn't really see the point of the reports. I worked from Sarajevo, then I worked from Zimbabwe, from Aceh, and Kosovo. Kosovo was my most interesting thing because I proposed to International Crisis Group to do something on Kosovo, and they said, well, if you want to do it, you can do it, just go there. And I was the only foreigner at the time coming to Kosovo, and managed to write a book called Kosovo Spring, which was really a who's who of Kosovo, and it helped a lot when the problem started in Kosovo. Journalists had some kind of guide of who is who and what is what, because it was quite complicated. But I still didn't think that our analysis was getting us anywhere. And so I joined another organization where my ex-colleague from International Crisis Group was working. It was called the International Rescue Committee, the IRC. And here I was very lucky because George Biddle, who was my colleague at the International Crisis Group, understood that we can create this job for me. He created the job for me, which was a journalist inside the International Rescue Committee. So I started being sent to different missions of International Rescue Committee with the job of pushing the advocacy that the IRC wanted the world to hear, and this way I was reporting from the field. So my op-eds had the value of being brought from the field, as the title of your broadcast is. And it worked very well for a long time. I will later show you how very effective it was. I would go, whether it's Malaysia or Burma or Africa or Latin America, and report on the things that were important for IRC. Mort Abramovich used to call the International Rescue Committee macaroni delivering outfit. This is not political analysis. This is just helping people to be fed. But in fact, the International Rescue Committee had people on the ground, and I quickly, because I speak fluent French and a few other languages and Spanish, etc. I was able to get a lot from the field. It was fresh. Whatever advocacy I was bringing, there was also concrete examples. I spent probably 1 year, if not more, fighting the State Department's Patriot Act. There was a Patriot Act which said that anybody who took weapons against the established government is a terrorist. As a result, there were plenty of refugees who were ex-combatants who were now refugees, whether it's in Sudan or in Burma or in Malaysia, who were forbidden from coming to the US on the refugee program because they were considered to be terrorists. I mean, there was a case from Iraqi men whom I met in Syria who paid a ransom to get his son back. But because he paid the ransom to a terrorist organization, he was accused of having materially supported the terrorist organization and therefore did not qualify. My first case, I described it in a Washington Post op-ed, was about a man who was called Lincoln, who lived in a refugee camp in Burma and who used to teach English in a zone which belonged to the Karen, what was it called? Karen Liberation Army or something. He was teaching English to kiddies. He was 70 years old and he had nephews in Miami, but he was not allowed to come to America because he was teaching English, therefore giving material support to Karens, although the American government was against the Burmese government's policies and supported the uprisings. He was still considered to materially support the terrorists and couldn't come. I wrote this piece, and 2 weeks later, Condoleezza Rice had a waiver for the Tam Hin, the camp where all those Burmese people were. So we decided I should go to another camp, and I went to another camp, and there was another waiver of the Patriot Act for all the Karen people, because my second article was about a tailor who was, I mean, not much tailor because they just have a little dress, very simple, but still the tailor was considered to be giving material support to terrorists or whatever the Patriot Act considered as terrorist. And then I went to Malaysia, and all of the Burmese fighters were put on the waiver, etc., etc. So there were 4 or 5 waivers as a result of advocacy that IRC and a few other organizations were doing. But putting it out there in the Washington Post was a kind of general shaming of the whole thing. So that's what I was doing. I'll show later how many I was able to do, but soon enough it turned out that I couldn't do much work anymore because we had problems in Afghanistan where IRC was getting the funds from the State Department. This was a different State Department, and there was money coming for refugees. And so I shouldn't be criticizing the US government too much. And because we were getting visas from the Afghan government, that was Karzai who was president, I shouldn't be criticizing the Afghan government too much. And because the Taliban killed 3 of our employees for teaching to girls, I shouldn't be offending the Taliban because they will kill us. As a result, there wasn't much what I could write, and we decided that it's better if I stop doing it, because at the time my mother was very sick, so I came back to Poland and I decided I will write a book about some of my experiences. I had 20 chapters, probably one third or so short chapters of my book ready on the 24th of February 2022. And the book is still somewhere there. I haven't touched it since 2022 because I totally and absolutely joined the effort to help Ukrainians. It's not a country that I had any particular sympathies for. I didn't like or dislike, but I have calculated recently at some checkpoint when I had nothing else to do with my colleague from Kharkiv. I have witnessed 36 wars in my life, all through Africa, Latin America, Asia, all different conflicts, Afghanistan, Iraq, etc. I have never seen something as unjust as this war. In several other wars, there's always bad people on both sides. In this case, Ukraine just wanted to move the way that my own country, Poland, moved from the Soviet bloc to the European bloc. And because they wanted this, they got punished and they are being punished. It is now the 50th year of this war. So I started by writing, and I wrote quite a lot of articles in the New York Times, in the Washington Post, Wall Street Journal, The Economist, Politico, whatever, wherever I could. Right now, much less interest in Ukraine. There is a little bit of a fatigue. There is also probably another conflict that is closer. And I've been writing mostly for American audience, and I do follow the American media daily, and I know that there are other priorities for American people, both internal and now quite a serious war outside. So much less of my articles are accepted, and what I do is grab the cars. I gather money from my friends and from other organizations, and I drive cars for the Ukrainian army, and I leave them with my friend who gives them to the soldiers because this is my way of contributing. This is mostly for medical teams that evacuate the wounded and the corpses. It is also sometimes for defense. I've just delivered a pickup that is going to have a defense against the Shaheeds that are coming there. This is what I do nowadays. All of my journalism is all those years has always been either for magazines. I was staff writer at the New Yorker at one point. I was staff writer at the New Republic. I was never told to be objective and to present the two sides and be balanced. I think that what is being done in Ukraine doesn't have any excuse. And writing op-eds, I just write my opinion. So I am very opinionated. I'm not objective writer. I'm a camera only, as the saying goes. No, I have my opinion, and I express my opinion in my articles. I don't know to which extent this is useful to students of journalism, but I think that number one, try to see if you have a talent for languages. Some people have it, some don't. If you have it, take advantage of it because it opens so many doors. You get to know people from other levels of society than the educated elite that speaks English. If you don't have the talent, you will have to pay for the translator or the fixer, as they call it. I know fixers a lot because I gave the money from my uncle's. I inherited some money and I gave it to create the fixer prize. So there's an international fixer competition, and once a year they get a prize. And fixers are extremely important. But nowadays, a colleague who is in covering the Middle East conflict told me he's paying $300 a day for driver and another 300 a day for the fixer. So being a fixer, I have been a fixer in my life. I never got this kind of money, but if you don't speak the language, you will have to rely on a fixer. If you speak the language, you get to get a little bit more of the local color. Another good advice is to find a niche, to see whether you can report from some country. I remember at one point I paid my way to go to Turkmenistan because I knew that the Central Asia program in one of the foundations that I was working with would eventually want to have a specialist. And I knew Kazakhstan, Tajikistan, Kyrgyzstan. So I thought I'll go for a week trip to Turkmenistan so that I would be the only one who has been in all those countries at the same time. And and it worked. I got a few assignments to go to the Fergana Valley, and it worked. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. But it pays to be very modest at the beginning, I would say. When I was at the staff writer at the New Republic, I had to explain every coffee I had on my expenses account, and then I needed the flak jacket, and the New Republic said, "No way, we're not paying for the flak jacket." So I went to the New Yorker and I said, "Do you want to have an article about the flak jacket?" And they said yes. And Tina Brown was coming as an editor, and she wanted an article about flak jackets. I wrote it for the first issue of Tina Brown's New Yorker, and she signed me up. So for the next 4 or 5 years, I was a staff writer at the New Yorker. And because they didn't want so many pieces from the hellholes that I was visiting, I would publish them in the New Republic that wouldn't want to pay for my coffees. And then the New Yorker did pay for my coffee. So this is how it goes. And I really don't know, because I read only the mainstream media. I do not get my news from Facebook, Instagram, and other so-called media, social media. I do get them from the reputed sources, and this probably limits me. But on the other hand, given what's happening in the world, by the time I went through the Polish, Russian, French, and American media, it's already noon and it's time for another coffee. So I would be more than happy to answer any questions you have. And again, if you have a talent for languages, learn whatever you can, because you get original sources. You hang around with the people from the other countries, so you're not in the pack of the American journalists. When you're an American journalist, you can hang around with the French, go with them to a different part and have more original. You also get the different views from them, because they get their input from their governments, from their media, and it changes, it enlarges your view. Languages are really a great tool to be a journalist.
Thank you. And no, I have been not as a journalist, but as a researcher, when you right where I have to rely on having somebody in order to translate, because I do not, despite efforts to try, I don't have a knack for languages. And so in particular, some places you need to have it limits what you can access. Your experience is incredible. And I would love to ask you a question about Sarajevo, but I want to bring in the students. We have Agatha and Cece and Natasha. If you would turn your cameras on,
Hello,
and
again.
um and Precisely because we ended with Anna, you're talking about being an op-ed writer. I'm gonna turn it to Cece first because she is the op-ed opinion editor at our student paper. And so I will um, start with her and then Natasha and Agatha in order. And I will let you respond and ask a question and we'll kind of round robin. And if anyone else watching has a question, please put it in the chat.
Hi, my name's Carly-Ann. Everyone calls me Cece. I am a senior English major. I minor in government and politics and French, and I'm also the opinion editor for The Torch. My first question is I did some research on some of the articles you wrote, and I believe you wrote for Ukraine, as you mentioned, but also in Afghanistan. So my question is, has there been any significant difference in the way your reporting has been received, depending on the country or topic that you were covering?
Definitely, yes. Afghanistan is a nightmare. Believe me. I went there for a small NGO. Recently, I went there last year, in fact, for a little NGO that does work in Afghanistan, and I was so limited by them about what I can write about and how I can write it, because if I write a little bit too much, the whatever program I describe will be shut down. So I couldn't write about what those people were doing for the girls' education, for sports programs for girls. Nothing about women was possible. So I was there. I know Afghanistan. I've been there, I don't know, 6, 7, maybe 10 times. I worked for International Rescue Committee in Afghanistan. Nowadays, from Afghanistan, you cannot write anything because they are so scared that even the little that they do will get shut down. But if you don't write about it, there is no way that they can do fundraising for this, have their program known, recognized, or have the Taliban a little bit scared of shutting them down. So we had to be extremely careful. I was covered all the time. Sometimes I pretend that I'm a man because I have a face a little bit that I can pretend this. But still, I couldn't do anything. And I had great people in the field. I managed to have great contacts. They still write to me. But you cannot do advocacy. Opinion writing about Afghanistan is putting local people, expats in the country, and local people who work with expats in danger. So the result is you can't write. If you don't write, why go? I don't want to be a war tourist. I want to make a difference, and you cannot make a difference there. Impossible.
Thank you.
Okay, hi, I'm Natasha. I'm a journalism student and I also am a social justice minor. I really admire your work and how you push for investigation, observation, and then also change. I think one of my main questions is or also opinionated, but do you believe that there is a difference between being a journalist and an advocate?
Um, Well, I wasn't. I think there is a difference. I think that the newspapers for which I was writing at the time when I was a senior policy advisor at the International Rescue Committee would not have published the articles that I was writing if I was writing them as a communications department of the International Rescue Committee, because it would have been seen as a opinion of the IRC. So the way I tried to do it was to rely on my own opinion, experience, the reportage I was writing, but leading to something that the IRC wanted as an advocacy point. For instance, I went to Somalia. The IRC had a big problem with gathering enough funds for water programs in Somalia. So I wrote 6 articles in 6 different newspapers about the water problems in Somalia, taking different aspects of it, speaking to different people. One was a photo essay, one was I could reach for them. So 7 or 8 different ways of writing about water in Somalia, because this was the advocacy point that they wanted. If it was written as here is IRC telling you that you need to give money because water is a problem, and so I don't know that it would fly. But I don't know whether it would fly now. Whether, there is Nicholas Kristof, of course, he can write anything like this, but how many of those there are? So yes, there was a difference. The advocacy in the other organizations was a little bit less from the field, as your web says. From the field made a big difference. The editors were more interested, and I had to observe a lot and give a lot of local color so that they see that I'm there.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Good afternoon. Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you, Dr. Clark, and dzień dobry, pani Husarska. Thank you for having me. My name is Agatha Moskal, and I'm a third-year psychology student with a social justice minor as well. I'm a part of the St. John's College of Liberal Arts and Sciences. So my first question is that you talked about some direct service, such as driving the cars in Ukraine. And I was wondering if you had any similar experiences doing that kind of direct services in any of the other wars that you've experienced or reported on.
Oh, yes. I don't think I ever stayed without getting involved. Something that I used to be punished in the primary and secondary school, and then suddenly people thought it was a good deed that I was doing. Since you're a psychology student, I will tell you the story. When I was living in Sarajevo, I got a scholarship for Stanford University, the Knight Fellowship. And when I arrived, they said, well, you definitely want to learn about the history of the Balkans, we presume, since you come from the Balkans. And I said, no. History of the Balkans, I've got enough in the Balkans. They produce more history than they can chew. Let me study the psychology of mind control, because I want to understand why the Serbs, the Croats, and the Bosnians are killing each other when there used to be neighbors. And now they take, hunting expeditions on the weekends to kill the other ethnical group. And I studied with Philip Zimbardo at Stanford because I wanted to precisely to see how we can solve the problems of the ethnic tensions in Bosnia. I was at that point I was still working with the International Crisis Group, but I would go from Sarajevo to the Serb side, and I always had short hair, but I would go to the hairdresser, because sitting at the hairdresser you could hear a lot of local gossip. And this was a way to understand the other side. What I was saying in my presentation, I went to live in Banja Luka, but then I would go on the Serb side in Sarajevo to stay with the Serbs and to see how they speak about the war, what they think, why do they kill the others? And this was at one point I was bringing pork meat into Sarajevo for the Serbs that lived there, because I had a car with international number plates. And so I was allowed to go there and back. And this was a way of making Serbian friends here, Serbian friends there. And I think you need to get involved at a certain point. You cannot just, watch them kill each other and sit there and just write what you're seeing. I cannot do it. I go to the war, and when I see that they need something, I immediately bring it. So yes, definitely. Every time I can, I get involved. Maybe too much, and
Thank you. Thank you about the psychology piece. Zimbardo is a big name.
yeah, Zimbardo was a big name. At one point, he hypnotized me in front of 200 students. He was quite a character, and he also brought. You probably know the name Cialdini, and Cialdini told us about the what was called the mosaic system or something. Anyway, I immediately came back to Bosnia and tried to do it. It was an idea of having a football match where on the one side we had the UN, and on the other side we will have a mixed group of Croats, Serbs, and Bosnians. And we sort of spoke to the UN, telling them, don't play too well, so that the three ethnic groups will win together, and this will sort of fortify the links between those guys, because it will be us versus them, and the us was tri-ethnic, but this was the way. So yeah, I learned it in Stanford and brought it to, not that it changed anything, but I tried.
Wow, thank you.
Before I see if you each have another question in the chat, one that came up that I wanted to raise. One student asked, out of all the stories you've covered, which one was your favorite and why?
I think my favorite was when again I was with International Crisis Group, and we were watching the elections in Bosnia, and it's I wrote it for the Washington Post. It was a very, very moving story, because we arrived with a Bosnian woman. Bosnians were the victims in this war, obviously. And we arrived with a Bosnian woman to the house that used to be her summer house. And at this point, it was inhabited by a Serb who occupied it. Except for the Bosnian woman was a high society, elegant lady, smoking her thin cigarettes, etc. And she was, well dressed, etc. And the Serb was, holes in his trousers, in his sweater, etc. And she started asking about this house, which used to be hers but wasn't hers anymore. And he didn't know what to answer. At some point she asked whether she could pick up the apples, and he said, well, of course, they are your apples. And then she said, did you find any books? And we went upstairs, and there were just nails in the walls, and his few things were hanging. And this woman still gives me. And this woman just grabbed her purse and gave the Serb money. And he accepted it because it was obvious that he needed the money. It was obvious that she could afford it. But the roles were completely upside down. This was the supposed occupant, and she was the supposed victim, and she was coming to her own dacha to to just see how it was going and whether there were any medical books of her husband left. And he said, no, I didn't find anything. But I had to leave from Sarajevo in a rush, and I didn't take my things. So I guess somebody took your books. I don't know. Well, it was so moving. I mean, all of us, there were 3 or 4 of us, and all of us had tears in our eyes, and it was and the Washington Post published the story. It was a short piece, but I had very good answers, very good response. At the time, it was mostly letters to the editor, not comments online. There wasn't any online then.
One more from the chat, and then I'll ask Cece, Natasha, and Agatha if they have a brief question at the end. One asked if journalism hadn't worked out for you, what career do you think you would have turned to since you had such a diverse education?
If it wasn't journalism? Oh, I wanted to be a fireman ever since I was a kid. I think I would probably want to make films. But I do nowadays. I do film because I dive a lot, and I like the technical and artistic aspect of filming. But I sort of like to play with language. I write in English directly, and when I publish in Polish, I translate myself from English to Polish, and I write in Spanish and in French. But the American media are probably where I mostly wrote. At the beginning, it was Le Monde. I was writing stories from some Central America. I think I would have stayed a translator. I have a training in translation, and I like translating, but it didn't pay much. I translated one book of 300 pages in Argentina, and I was able to afford one pair of wool socks, one, with what they paid me. I went to Uruguay to spend the money, so it wasn't a career that was going to make me rich. But yes, translating was, I like, if you can choose your authors. I mean, between Orwell, Lincoln, and Dostoevsky, and Timothy Garton Nash, I translated a lot. He wrote about subjects that interest me. But I also translated 36 films in subtitles into Spanish. So I chose the films are easier to translate if you're not a native speaker, because it's a spoken language rather than a literary language. So I would have stayed a translator if the fireman career wasn't open to me.
Cece, did you have another question?
Yeah, just I know you touched briefly on how you learned certain languages, but I was just wondering did you find a certain method of language learning more effective than others, or do you just have the natural inclination?
I think it's natural. It's like with music, either you have it or you don't. I was just lucky to have it. But I also very actively try to speak. The moment that I have 3 words, I try to put them together and make a sentence out of it. The one language that really gave me a lot of trouble is Arabic, because the spoken Arabic is spoken differently in all different countries. And I was doing the mapping of the civil society in Morocco, Algeria, Libya, Tunisia, and Yemen, and Syria and Iraq, and all of those civil societies. I arrive and I bring the accent and the language. The spoken Arabic of Morocco is not understandable to Syrians. The one spoken Arabic that is understandable to everybody is Egyptian, because there is a the soap operas from Egypt are watched everywhere in the Arab world. So this is the Amiya. And Fusha, which is the official Arabic language, is not spoken. It's only the language of the Quran and of the newspaper. So you cannot switch from one country to another with the same Arabic. As a result, I have a total mess in my head. And learning alone is very difficult because there are no vowels. It's only the consonants. So you can't learn yourself because you look at the word and you can't make it.
Thank you.
I also had another question, and it kind of connects back to something that you remarked earlier. I noticed in one of your works in Somalia's Endless Hell, you mentioned how security conditions make journalism almost impossible to report. And I just wanted to ask, in your career, have there been other moments where you felt like there's been threats to your freedom to express and publish stories? And how do you kind of work around that?
Yeah, I mean, I've been detained in 3 countries. I am probably persona non grata in a few others, but I guess Afghanistan is the most difficult. Somalia was very difficult. I wanted to show you. Let me see if I can do it. Wait. Can you see my page now? Hello?
No, we can't.
Share. Wait. Entire screen. Share. Now you will see yourself. Don't go away. Can you see now?
Yes.
Okay. So this is the material support is this Patriot Act. Are you seeing what I'm seeing?
Yes.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So you see, this is, for instance, my trip to Somalia here. And I stayed there 2 weeks, and we had to be very careful, but I managed to write. This was 2007. Wall Street Journal, Washington Post, Slate, Newsweek, Herald Tribune, Open Democracy, Project Syndicate, a photo essay, 24 reprints, etc., etc. This is what was possible then. I don't think it's possible now, but in Pakistan and Afghanistan, I had to be very careful in Swat Valley, etc. Very, very careful. So, wait, stop sharing. There we go. Yeah.
Thank you so much.
And I also had another question.
I'm here to answer them.
I was wondering if you have done any work on Palestine or what's currently happening over there.
No, I didn't, because I was in Israel at the time of the war with Iraq a long, long time ago, and I went to the Ulpan to learn Hebrew, but there was too much work and I couldn't follow the Hebrew lessons. And my Arabic is not good enough to do anything on Palestine, so I would have to go with the fixer, and it's very, very difficult to find objective fixers in war zones. I remember in Kosovo, for instance, there were many Albanians who were offering their services, and they were trying to save their country from the Serbs. And I had the same problem in Palestine. I tried to go somewhere, and I realized that I will be given the official version. So when I reported from the Palestine, it was during the Scuds war with Iraq, and at the time I only spoke with journalists and intellectuals, doctors, etc., and I got quite frustrated because it was only the elite. But at the time when I was a reporter, Gaza wasn't a problem. So, it is nowadays. And I would probably, if I were now a reporter in the Middle East, I would probably be going to Gaza, definitely. But I'm not. I also think that this is one of the conflicts when, there are layers and layers of animosity on both sides. And unlike in Ukraine, when I speak both languages, understand Ukrainian perfectly and speak fluently Russian, I can make a difference with my knowledge. And I also know very well that there is absolutely no fault on the Ukrainian side. So I have no doubts where my sympathies lie and who is the bad guy, who is the good guy. Here, if you look at October the 7th, there is one. When you go and see what the settlers are doing, there's another. So you switch constantly your point of view, and with this if you don't speak the languages, I don't think that you can make sense. I have an Italian friend who does cover Palestine without speaking Arabic, and I admire it, but I would not accept such an assignment. I would learn Arabic before.
Question
Yes,
that came into the chat. Oh, sorry, Agatha, because it relates to this. And what's striking to me in the way you have explained your own progress, right, is this deep commitment to um right, to learning, to the narrative, to learning the stories of the people in the places that you are covering. Because I in your answer to Agatha, I heard kind of the contrast with how you approached Sarajevo and the Bosnian Serbian conflict, because again, you were able to go to the different places and
I spoke the
understand.
language.
And one of the questions that came in the chat is do you think what are the responsibilities of a journalist? The question that came in is, what responsibilities do you feel journalists carry that people outside the field might not recognize? And I heard a couple in the stories you've told, like being concerned about that reporting doesn't put people at greater risk. But what do you think in terms of, if you were thinking about kind of responsibilities or the ethics of journalism, what strikes you as most important?
I would say to give the voice of the local people. I mean, please remember, I have all my life I've been either in the magazines of opinion or I wrote the op-eds. So I have never been the objective reporter that reports only on the facts. I suppose that for journalists who work for the dailies where they have to be objective, objectivity is something that is necessary. I am unable to be objective when I am staying with like I was. I have a friend who gave birth today in Kharkiv, and they killed 11 people yesterday. How objective can you be with this monster killing people in Kharkiv, the place where my friend is giving birth? But as I say, I've never been a reporter only. At the beginning I was, but it was in the Polish daily called Gazeta Wyborcza, and it was the first independent daily in the post-Soviet sphere. We didn't make any difference between opinion and facts at the time. We were fighting for the truth, fighting for the elections, fighting to So there wasn't much objectivity. We were just writing what we believed in. Later on, the newspaper Gazeta Wyborcza now has very big division between the opinion and the. But it's very, very difficult. There are people who go local, as it's called. It's very difficult to be reporting. Well, forget living in Russia and reporting on Russia. I think Steve Rosenberg from the BBC is one of the few who can do it. Otherwise, you risk a lot. But when you look at the centrifugal disintegration of Yugoslavia and of the Soviet Union, you see that the journalist who lived in Belgrade had a Belgrade view. They knew people in Belgrade. They had an apartment in Belgrade, and they did their shopping in Belgrade. And for them, Banja Luka, Mostar, or Sarajevo were provinces. So they were not objective in the sense that they were centered in the metropolis, and it was the same for the Moscow people, who couldn't understand what the hell the Ukrainians want. We are one nation. Isn't Moscow the capital? And the disintegration, the way that the Baltic states dropped out first, and Moldova, etc., etc. All those things, from the point of view of a journalist who has only Russian friends and speaks Russian and lives in Russia, and suddenly there is someone speaking Estonian and somebody else saying, no, 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 Moldovan kitchen is better than Russian kitchen, or Ukrainian borscht is different from the Russian borscht. I mean, the whole identity of Ukraine has been negated by many journalists who saw Ukraine as the province to which they can go. The same probably happened and didn't get to the end in, let's say, Indonesia, and the movements in Aceh, the GAM. I was there with their movement, or with the flags, and they wanted independence. It didn't happen, but I was in the East Timor. They wanted independence, and it did happen. So you have to try.
Thank you very much. A number of we're at the end of what is our common hour, and then students go back into more classes or internships and the like. Thank you very much,
Thank
Anna,
you.
for sharing your stories. In the chat, multiple students are saying how much they loved listening to your experiences
I don't know
and
how
how
to open
insightful
the chat.
this is. More will watch it on when it gets uploaded onto our YouTube channel. I want to thank Cece, who had to get to work, Natasha and Agatha for being our student leaders on this webinar. And I am grateful for all of you for spending the last hour with us, and look forward to the fact that more students will get to watch this in the future. Thank you very much, Anna.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you.